do it.
Okay.
Why
Phil,
don't you kick us off today?
I don't want to. Okay. Hi. So, really, let's just start from the beginning. How do you remember getting into music?
My dad's always the first thing I think of, how I got into music, because he was just such a fan of music, and he played guitar a little bit, but I didn't really know that till I was a little older. But you know, he just always had the radio on, and when I was growing up in like the early 90s, he was really rebuying his whole record collection on CD at the time, so I was just hearing all of that stuff, and you know, yeah, just pretty young, like was really drawn to music and kind of knew this is what I wanted to do. And then when I was maybe 12, 13, kind of found punk rock, and like that was the first music maybe that was like mine and didn't come from him, that I really like dove into. And it just made it seem that was maybe the first thing that made it seem attainable to actually do it myself, to see people, you know, the mystique was kind of stripped away, and it's just like this DIY thing that anyone can decide to do and then do it. I think, you know, that's really how I got into it, and it's something that was really like informed the way I've continued to do it my whole life, and it's honestly learning that stuff is I think the reason I even have a career doing it now.
Nice. What were some of those like first influences that you remember from your dad that like he kind of impressed? And then also, what are some of the first like punk bands that kind of shaped, you know, that mentality that you talked about?
Yeah, stuff from my dad would be the big ones, probably like Tom Petty and Neil Young. Those are a couple of his favorites, and really anything, you know, 70s classic rock, roots rock, the band, and 80s stuff, even like John Mellencamp. I heard him play a lot, you know, growing up. And I think like, I remember the Black Crowes, probably like the last new band I remember him getting into. And then, and he also really liked a lot of like outlaw country and Otis Redding, Southern Soul and stuff like that too. And so I kind of got all of that stuff from him. And then like bands I was finding when I was 13 or so that were really speaking to me would be like Rancid, Social Distortion, you know, Bouncing Souls, things like that, you know, yeah.
How did you move from punk and like aggressive heavy music to the music that you're doing now?
I think it just kind of always stayed with me, and when I was doing like heavier stuff, you know, all through middle school and high school, I played in the school orchestra, so I'm like I'm not exactly classically trained, but like a little bit I am, I guess. So yeah. I'm kind of, I just kind of found myself in the hardcore scene kind of being like the only person I knew who sort of wanted to do more, or wanted to do something else, or wanted to do, you know, real like songwriting and melody and things like that. And so I think, yeah, I just kind of reached, maybe by the time I was 19 or 20, like the heavy stuff was kind of not exactly satisfying in the same way that it had been earlier, and I just wanted to like, I think also I kind of understood, even though I was 20, I felt old already, and I was kind of like understood that, especially back then, and maybe it's a little different now I think, but back then, like, you know, if you were 26 or 28 still in a hardcore band, it was like old fucking grandpa, you know?
Yeah, right.
So I think, yeah, I think like I was really conscious of like, well, I want to play music for the rest of my life. I don't want to do some bullshit. Like, I want to play music, so.
Don't want it to feel like stuck inside of us.
For sure.
Capsule.
Yeah, and I don't want to be like forced into retirement at 28. I want to be, you know, and I think that made me think of Neil Young and Tom Petty and people my dad listened to, and I felt drawn back to that, you know. It felt like, well, that shit's really cool and really speaks to me, and you can like do it at any age. It's cool when you're 20, it's cool when you're 70.
At some point, your teen angst is gonna go away.
For sure, and it's like, yeah, music is still gonna be how I, you know, process and like speak about my life and experience, and I don't, you know, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't want to lose that outlet just because, like, oops, I'm 30 now or whatever, you know.
And I feel like it's kind of a full circle thing. You usually end up where you started.
Yeah,
it's such a funny thing. Like, those early influences are gonna stay with you forever.
That really does tend to be how it goes. And I like, the longer I do, the more records I make too, I realize more and more how much I'm influenced by things I really listened to when I was 5 or 6, or, you know, just like, and stuff from my dad, and also like pop music from that time that I heard from like older cousins, and just in, you know, heard in pop culture in general. I think like all the time I'm like listening to a record or something, and it's, you know, things people wouldn't expect, but I'll just hear a little thing that I'm like, I know that's like was influenced by this one thing from like this Janet Jackson song or a Sheryl Crow song or something, you know, that's just like, but yeah, I think you're right. That stuff really, it's like, that's the most kind of implanted music in my soul, is just like that, from that formative age range. Yeah.
Not to jump too far back, but like, what was it hard to get into like hardcore and punk music at that age in Oklahoma? I mean, you know, like, you're not in like a huge metropolitan city. You're probably not having as many people, you know, exposed to that stuff. What was that like?
You know, luckily, like Tulsa at the time, like late 90s, early 2000s, had a pretty decent hardcore scene for the size that it was and for how conservative it was, you know. And a lot of the hardcore scene was like church adjacent also, but then there was a lot of crossover where there just wasn't enough of, you know, all the bands would play together. It was kind of like, led to a lot of like being kicked out of churches moments and stuff, you know, but it was fun, and it was something to do, and like, you know, yeah, it was a small scene, but for how small it was, maybe like pretty much the same. Big show would be like 50 to 80 kids, and it's just like the same version of the same crowd at every show, more or less. But like, there were a lot of active bands that came out of that pool of people for that time, I think, and there were shows, you know, all the time, every weekend, every few days, like, so it was really, and to be exposed to things like, you know, shows in abandoned firehouses, or, I mean, downtown Tulsa was entirely abandoned pretty much back then, and there were shows on, like another tattooer, Dustin, would do shows on the roof of a parking garage downtown, just outside, you know, just illegally, just go
completely,
just
the
go,
heart of it,
just bring a PA up there, there were electrical outlets somebody discovered up there, and they were just like, we could just plug a PA in and have a show. I mean, that happened several times. There was just nobody down there to like hear it and tell you to stop. And so I feel really lucky for that. Like, as sleepy as Tulsa was, it really low key had like this really cool, like, educational punk scene for me.
Kind of got to do it while nobody was looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
At what point did tattoos come into the picture?
Probably like when I found punk rock, you know, all the bands I was getting into were pretty heavily tattooed. It was becoming a common sight, and I think at that point, you know, I thought it was really cool and thought like, I want to do that too. And I was kind of the youngest one in my friend group when I was a teenager. So, you know, I would be like the 16-year-old in a band with like 18 and 20-year-olds. So all my friends were kind of like getting tattooed before me, and you know, I would go to shops with them, and it was illegal in Oklahoma at the time. We would go to Kansas or Arkansas or whatever. Yeah. And I would like tag along and just hang out in shops. And so, you know, yeah, it just kind of felt like it was always gonna happen. Yeah.
So what are some things right now in your life that influence like the music you're making today, and, you know, like what drives that?
I think just like the world we live in, and, you know, what a mindfuck it is in every possible way is a big, you know, motivation for like what I'm writing now and why I want to write now. And I think also maybe in a way it's like I write to kind of, I used to write, it came from a lot of like self-loathing and being really hard on myself. And I think now when I write, I try to, so I'm like writing to heal from that stuff. I think I was writing to heal back then too. I just didn't know how to do it yet. And it was a little misguided. And I think, you know, it's just been, that's been the journey. But yeah, it's a little more adult, I guess, a little less like lovesick, I suck, I hate myself, and a little more, hopefully a little more mature than that. But yeah,
Well,
that's
it's
kinda
cool
where
that
I'm at.
like, you know, I think some people might hear your stuff and be like, man, some of it's pretty sad and, dark and blah, blah, blah. But like, it's cool to hear you say like, it's actually my healing journey. It's like, it's an up and up thing. It's not actually like.
Yeah, I think that's really why I was drawn to it. I think like, I think it was kind of a way to like, sort of make sense of my thoughts and feelings before I like knew about or had access to therapy or whatever, So just like kind of was naturally drawn to do that, and I knew that it felt good. I didn't really know why, but I kept doing it, and I think that's why, So that's still really kind of like always the approach to my writing is really just like, it's really, I think I've realized I do it to heal myself or to attempt to make sense of myself or some part of myself. And, those have turned out to be like the most satisfying songs to write, and the ones that really people have like connected with
Drawn
and
to the
given me
most,
my
yeah.
career. Yeah.
It's awesome.
What do you think? I mean, there's places have their sounds, Nashville, Texas, and things like that. What is distinctly Oklahoman in music? What is our thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have like, people call it red dirt, which I've always thought is a weird, confusing genre, but I think that basically it just means it's like roots music from Oklahoma. And I think that maybe the defining characteristic is that it's really a big melting pot, that there kind of is no one sound or one defining characteristic, that we're just kind of this crossroads of America where, all these different influences from the South and West and wherever else all kind of meet. And I think like, I'm really happy to just be a part of that. I think there's been a lot of like good, folk and roots songwriters from here. And it's cool to just like be one of them.
What do you see for like the future of music in Oklahoma?
I think it's really good right now. I don't know as much about Oklahoma City, but Tulsa's pretty sick right now. Like there's a lot of good stuff in a lot of different genres, I would say. And it feels cool. Like I think that not to be like delusional, but I think that the sleepy little scene that we had, 20, 25 years ago is maybe in some way helped be a part of the foundation for what is there now. And like, that's really cool to see. And there's just bands from, things work differently now. Like I find bands on the internet that I think are really good, and then I'm like, find out they're from Tulsa and I've never heard of them playing a local show or anything. And they're like
Pop up overnight.
doing big tours and shit already. And I think that's just how it works. But yeah, there's bands like that. I'm like, God, if this band had existed in Tulsa when I was 16, it would have been so amazing, But like, yeah, that's really fun to see.
Well, and it took the groundwork. It's funny you say like, it was a sleepy scene when you were a kid, but it's like those kids are adults now, and they have the means to.
It's almost like the whole like the situation that was brewing there it erupted into what it is, and it almost couldn't have been there before, Like,
I think, yeah, totally. And there were people that laid the foundation for our thing, and it was even sleepier when they did it, I guess. Yeah. And I think that now, like, a lot of the young musicians who I meet now, like, I don't think they were even old enough to see my old bands, but they like have heard of them. So.
Right, they'll go back and find them.
Yeah, the internet doesn't forget, man.
Yeah. So like people have told them about that stuff, and so like, yeah, it's a trip, dude. But I'm excited about where it's going.
Fuck yeah.
Cool. I think that's good.